that looks like it started. So, hello, Sarah.
Hello, Andy.
I feel like I know you. I guess a lot of people say that.
Oh, that's a wonderful thing. I don't know if I've heard that very much before. It's very sweet.
Yeah, I feel very warm to see your face because I've only recently been introduced to you, and I found a lot of what you put forward has been really important for me. So I thank you for that.
Oh,
So whenever I think about speaking and talking with people, I don't like to really introduce them myself because I'd like people to say what they would like to say because I understand that you're an author, you're an MVC facilitator, and you're a neurobiology educator. I can see your cello in the background, and
yeah.
I know you speak Russian. So, is there anything else that you wanted to add to tell people about Sarah?
No, there's a website if you get interested during the conversation that has all the info. Yeah, sarahpeyton.com. So you can find me very easily.
Yeah, so I've had a look at that. So I guess from my perspective, I sent you an email and you very kindly said you'd have a chat with me. And I'm just going to let people know that I'm a nurse by trade. I'm also an advanced clinical practitioner, which means I work in a general practice scenario and see people. And I'm also qualified as a person-centred counsellor. And um, I've just gone on a new journey of rediscovering person-centred counselling. And then from person-centred counselling, I discovered nonviolent communication. And then I also discovered polyvagal theory, and I'm starting to look at a little bit of neurobiology. And I've really got my son to thank for the quote that he sent me from Marshall Rosenberg about every criticism, judgment, and whatever is a tragic expression of an unmet need. So I'm also aware that I'm doing a lot of work myself in order to become somebody that can help facilitate for people with emotional problems, communication problems, relationship problems. But I also realise that I need to do a lot of work in getting myself prepared for that. So my understanding is that empathy and acceptance is the key to personal development, and I wondered what you would say about that.
Oh, well, one of the things I love about interpersonal neurobiology, which has sort of more become relational neuroscience now, but Daniel Siegel coined the phrase interpersonal neurobiology, was that one of its tenets is that a brain that is being well held with understanding and precise, both precise and warm understanding, will um, will find its own way to its most complex expression. And since empathy really holds brains well, I think that that's absolutely true, that our most complex expression, and by complex we mean both linked and differentiated in as many ways as possible, so that each part of the brain is doing its own job and not trying to do other parts' jobs, but working very closely in concert with everything else. So brains are like snowflakes. There are no two brains that are alike. Brains are unique, just as, of course, people are. And each brain has its own expression that it's going to move toward when it's held well with empathy and resonance.
Yeah, I feel quite excited when you say that because when I did my person-centered counselling, which is like over 20 years ago now, I had a certain understanding of empathy. And in those days, do you have a knowledge of person-centered background from Carl Rogers' perspective?
I love Kyle Rogers, but I don't have a therapy degree. I have not studied therapy. I just work with the nonviolent communication and language and the brain.
Mm. And because Rosenberg was a student of Rogers.
Yes, he loved Kyle Rogers. Yeah.
Yeah, and did you ever meet
Rosenberg?
Rosenberg?
Yes, I did. At the end of his time. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And one of the things that
Um,
Carl
I'd like to
Rogers.
say, I'd like to reframe that. I was one in a group of 300 watching him speak live. Back to
Yeah,
English.
okay, thank you. Um, so, over the past year, I've developed my own concept of empathy, which is a framework, and I consider it like a wicker basket. that
Mm.
you, in America, you might take a home-baked apple pie to somebody in a wicker basket. And my vision of this wicker basket is that it's organic and wholesome, strong
Mm.
yet flexible, and a vessel to contain the emotion that goes along with empathy. And my knowledge of you only comes from early November when I attended a nonviolent communication workshop in London. So
Uh,
my knowledge of Sarah Peyton has been quite a bit of a whirlwind,
oh yeah.
and a lot of what you stand for and say really resonates for me. And one of the things that you say is, of course. Where does of course come from?
um, it just comes from again another of the tenets of interpersonal neurobiology is that brains make sense, that they're doing the things that they do because of very good historical reasons or very good organic biological reasons, and that as we begin to understand the brain more and more, then we simply begin to make more and more sense to ourselves, and others make more and more sense to us. So the of course is a, is an affirmation that that lets someone know that we're accompanying them and that their brain makes sense to us.
And I guess not many people get that. I think it's similar to empathy, but it's kind of a different take on empathy, maybe.
Well, it's empathetic. It's a it's short. It's short. It
Hmm.
when it's really authentic, it feels really good.
Yeah, and
When
for me,
yeah,
yeah, it makes me
yeah,
sing and dance when you say that, of course, because it's got that wholesome genuinity of empathy and acceptance and realness, and
yeah,
it feels genuine. So that's a
yeah.
really nice feeling.
Mm.
And I guess everybody needs to have that feeling, and they deserve to have that feeling. And I don't think we get enough of it in the world today.
Oh
What's
gosh,
your
no.
thought on that?
Yeah, I think we're very low on resonant support for brains.
Mm. And you've got your own course now that you do it, haven't you?
Yes, I do a number of courses.
But it's a certification course in your own
Oh,
words.
yes, for people to learn to do. Yes, it's an interesting thing because when we're doing resonance, now, so nonviolent communication has a particular form of empathy where you're thinking about people's feelings and needs. And so when I discovered both relational neuroscience and nonviolent communication, I was like, what is nonviolent communication doing in the brain? It feels really different to me than the way usually people talk to me. And I started to research and discovered that in particular, the feelings and needs awaken parts of the right side of the brain, and mostly we live in and work in explicitly live in and work in our left side of our brain,
Hmm.
and we get things done with the left side of our brain, and we make our plans, and we carry them out, we do our to-do list. But the right side of the brain has a lot of nonverbal holding that's happening in it. So it's got our facial expressions understanding and our vocal tone understanding, but there are also kinds of language that awaken the right hemisphere, and feelings and needs are some of that language. So I thought, what other kinds of language awaken the right hemisphere? What else will do what NVC does with language? And so I collected all of that research and created an even more expanded set of possibilities for what kinds of language we'll be using to change brains, not to change brains so much as to facilitate brains finding themselves.
That's a beautiful thing to say because I think when you start counselling, a lot of people go into counselling to make themselves better,
Yeah.
and actually they're okay as they are.
Mm.
And when you say discovering a brain, the brain is there and it's okay, and it's kind of going back to a more natural state, isn't it?
Well, once we look at what the impact of trauma, you know, what we need to do is to make our brains cozy, warm places to live.
Mm, mm,
So the natural state of our brain may be really cluttered and cold and dirty and have burnt food in it. I mean, it's just like a home. you know. And as a result of trauma, because with trauma we have intrusive memory, so trauma rewires the brain, and we don't get unwired from trauma just by time. That idea of time healing all wounds is not true. We're much more in the William Faulkner quote area of uh, the past is never dead or gone. The past, let's see, what's this quote? The past is never gone. It's always right here. I can't remember it, but it's a lovely quote. And so time does not heal all wounds. Our brains just keep recycling trauma. So we have what we need is we need support in order to rewire the brain after trauma and sort of or dewire the wiring that trauma put in. But in addition, what we get is we get what's called post-traumatic growth, where we make more and deeper sense of the world and each other once we've healed our trauma. So I see it less as some return to a natural original state and more a journey toward full, beautiful expression of what's there for us to grow into.
A little bit like actualization, maybe.
Yeah.
I was really interested about the default mode network that you talk about, because my first introduction to that, I think, was from Daniel Siegel.
Yes.
And my original understanding of that is how busy your brain is when you're resting, because you're taking social cues from everywhere to make sense of the world and to be a good social being.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about that, maybe?
Yes, the default mode network was a funny discovery that was made in several places in the world in the same year. That people had been playing with fMRI machines for a number of years, and they thought that the brain had a sort of a static state, a white noise state that it would go into, like a television that's not on a channel, for those of us who are old enough to remember channels on television. And and what the scientists all over the world discovered was that the white noise made sense, that there were patterns in the white noise that were shared by every human, and that the white noise was, in fact, the brain's automatic default setting, which is a setting where we consider all of the social connections that we have, or all of the things that we're holding on our plate that need to be done, or all of our creative kind of brainstorming. So the default mode network is most active when we're falling asleep or when we're waking up and we're doing some kind of routine task, when we're washing dishes or driving a long distance. And if we're traumatized, the default mode network uses that time to beat us up. So if you're
that's what you call lacerating, isn't it?
Yes,
You've changed the phrase to lacerating.
the lacerating default mode network. You are not enough, you are bad, you are awful, you are stupid, whatever the phrases are. But most of us have some key phrases that our default mode network will use against us over and over again. You never get it right, people don't like you. All of those kind of internal messages that are disruptive and stressful. And so part of making the brain a good place to live is to use empathy, to begin to detoxify, to take the razor blades away from the lacerating default mode network and begin to create support structures that allow the default mode network to become more and more helpful and functional.
So, what is it that makes us attack ourselves?
Trauma. We're wired to make sense of, so a child that's in a traumatic situation, it's not conducive to their survival for them to see the big picture. It's not conducive for a child to say, oh, my father is an alcoholic. That doesn't create the hypervigilance that a child in a dangerous situation needs. The child is wired to blame themselves
Yeah.
for the dangerous situations that they're in. So a child is wired to say, oh, I've done something wrong. If I can figure out what I'm doing wrong, I can do something different and my father won't beat me. Or my mother won't be sarcastic and cutting. If I can just not express anything at all and be silent all the time, maybe I'll be free from humiliation and shame. You know, the child is trying to find the very best way to survive a difficult situation, and blaming ourselves facilitates finding the best way when we're powerless.
That seems like a really heavy burden
It's such a heavy
to
burden.
carry, doesn't it?
Yeah,
You're right.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I've got a lot of questions down here because I'm not good at picking questions out of my head, which is why I'm
Yeah,
looking down.
fine.
So, in your first book, which I've just finished listening to, and
Uh,
it was kind of a rushed listening to, so I'm
oh,
going to go back to
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Um, you do a lot of work with meditation. Why is meditation so helpful from a neurobiology point of view? What is it that helps the brain become different?
Mm. Well, meditation allows, it's like push-ups for the brain. It's like a kind of a brain workout or a brain strengthening. And meditation will do different things depending on what you're focused on. So if you're focused on a single point of light and you're training your attention, then your attention muscle becomes very strong. If you're working with bringing resonance to the brain and rewiring the traumatic messages, then you're creating neural connections between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala in the right hemisphere, which is very healing for trauma.
Kind of
And
calms it down, doesn't it?
yeah,
Yeah,
very much.
retunes it to a more gentleness.
Absolutely. And if you don't have a lot of trauma, then meditation can be it can be pretty easy to step into meditation. But if you've lived through a lot of dangerous experiences, emotionally dangerous or physically dangerous, then stopping to meditate can be really disturbing because you're letting the default mode network have a chance to be lacerating, to cut you to slices. So um, the reason that I do the guided meditations is to give people something to do, that to focus on, that allows the right hemisphere to begin to grow those neurons that we need for self-regulation, but without letting the default mode network, without slipping the dogs of war of the default mode network on the self. Yeah.
And when I tried those, I found when I say simplistic, that doesn't mean simple,
Oh
but I
yeah.
found them quite easy to slide into,
Oh good.
and
Yeah.
and not as difficult as when I have before. And even people like my yoga teacher, she helps me with meditation sometimes,
Yeah.
and she says, "Don't worry if you slip away,
Yeah.
come back."
Yeah.
Would you say come back with gentleness? And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and that's a really nice feeling to not beat yourself up because
Yeah.
I
And
had a
to
tendency to do that.
Oh, me too. To have have that instruction, like, no, be warm with yourself when you slip away. Say to yourself, of course you're slipping away.
There's your of course. I
Then
love the
of
of
course.
course.
Yeah.
Um, I wonder if you'd be happy to share some of your must reads, must materials, because when I look at all of the neurobiology and NVC work that
Yeah.
I've touched on, and I mentioned in my email to you people like Matthew Lieberman,
Oh, yeah.
Gabor Mate, Carl Rogers, Rosenberg, Segal, Alfie Cole,
Hmm.
Rick Hansen, Stephen Porges, and Deb Dana. Where do you get most of your inspiration apart from those people?
Well, in two places. One is that I try to stay uh, up on the published research that's coming out from researchers that work in the field of relational neuroscience. And the other is that every year we do a free resonance summit where we invite researchers to come and speak. Uh, and then we get to interview them and talk to them and ask them questions and have them talk about their
And that's on your website, isn't it?
Yeah, that'll be in April of 2025.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I've recently just watched 2 wind-ups from 2 years
Oh yeah.
at the end,
Yeah.
and I found those really interesting.
Yeah. So this year we're going to have 2025. We're going to have Moshe Gif talk with us, and he's the epigeneticist out of Montreal, Canada, who has been discovering that collective trauma, large-scale trauma in societies, climate events, wars, famines, pandemics, enters the DNA and is visible in people's DNA, just like as if we were trees. When you cut down a tree and you look and you see what's happening with the different years, how they impacted the tree. You can see that in the rings, and we can see what's happening with people's experience of collective trauma in the expression of their protein sheath around their DNA. And if a large number of people live through the same event, they have the same marker in their DNA. And he believes that in the next 30 to 40 years, we'll be able to look at someone's DNA and say, like, this person comes from a family that lived through the Irish famine. This person came from a family that lived through the Holocaust.
It's a bit like carbon dating, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So he'll be speaking with us this spring. So I love both. I love to learn in any way I can. Yeah.
I was interested when I touched on NVC about Walter Wink. You familiar with Walter Wink?
Well, I remember that Marshall loved Walter Wink. I haven't read Walter Wink myself.
I think for me, when I looked at the underpinning values of NVC, some of the stuff that Walter Wink talked about in his book Engaging the Powers, he talked about domination cultures.
Yeah, that was something Marshall talked about.
Yeah, and from my understanding, a lot of the culture that we live in and the organisations that we may work for, they do a lot of dominating and a lot of damage to us. And I think there's a lot of need to make. I kind of think people need to be aware of the delusional world that they live in and that they participate in unwittingly. Have you got anything to say about that, or does that?
Well, it just fractures into a million fractals in my brain, because of course, one of the things that happens with domination culture is that it's so implicit. It's so invisible. It's like an invisible structure that we're living in, that causes things to happen that we don't necessarily want to have happen. So we need one of the writers that you didn't mention yet that I love, that you and your audience might really enjoy, is Ian McGilchrist.
Yeah, I've heard that name, but I've not read anything by him.
Oh, his work is lovely, and he speaks about how the lateralization of the human brain leads to certain expressions in culture of domination or of something less dominating, and that we need again, coming back to nonviolent communication and what does nonviolent communication do to the brain, we need our right hemispheres awakened, because we need to be able to look at the structures that we live within and see whether or not they're harming individuals or groups. To what degree is, if we're looking at, for example, systemic racism, we can see its expression in the statistics of how long people live, and in how their health indicators are, and whether or not maternal health, is supported in a certain population. What's the child-infant death rate or the infant mortality rate? What's the rate of mortality of mothers during the childbirth process? We can look at these kinds of statistics and say, oh, something is wrong in our society, and we need to begin to take steps to make things better. So it requires working against domination either requires kind of a brand new overturn into, for example, gift economy, as we see with Mickey Kashtan, who's one of the voices in nonviolent communication, or we need really thoughtful and caring voices within a larger democratic society that are
There's a need for a voice to voice.
yes, to be
I
able
think
to.
Paulo Freire called that conscientization.
Oh yes, I love that.
Yeah, and that was introduced to me 20 odd years ago when I
Yeah.
did my person centred counselling, and I think we often don't awaken stuff of our social right as human beings when we live in certain. I'm a nurse by trade, so I work in probably an environment that's the least appropriate for me
Oh.
Because it's an authoritarian,
Mm.
it's rule led,
Oh.
it's dominated by bureaucrat and
Mm.
medicine. So I guess for me, it's never been the right environment to work in because when you question things, you get quashed, squashed.
Oh. So that voice that Paolo's talking about is not welcome. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's not fair for people to be kind of blind to not be aware of that. So I guess that's something that
Right.
when I looked at the underpinning of certainly the MVC work, what resonated so strongly for me was the delusional systems that Walter Wink talks about, and I think that's really important to share with people.
Yeah.
Talking about, I asked you in your email what had you been doing lately, and I've kind of come aware of what you've been doing lately, and you were talking with Raj Kumari.
Yes. Yes.
And I watched 1.5 of those yesterday,
Oh,
and
that's a wonder.
I enjoyed them very much. And I understand Raj Kumari is working with um, leadership and culture in organisations.
Yes, especially in Silicon Valley.
And do you know where that comes about? Where does she sit in that environment?
As a consultant.
Mm.
Yeah.
And
Working and a coach, executive coach, working with executives in Silicon Valley.
so that's her background is from coaching.
Uh, yeah.
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 Because I guess that my feeling is there's a great need for that in the NHS where we work at the moment.
Right.
Because Gabor Mate talks about the loss of empathy in the
Yeah.
world,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of writing about the loss of empathy in healthcare and how that causes burnout. And Raj Kumar and yourself were talking a little bit about burnout through lack of empathy and resonance. Could you talk a
Well,
little bit
and
about
lack,
that?
and lack of agency.
Yeah, agency, which is that's
Yeah.
kind of a new word, isn't it? And I wonder, do people understand what that means?
Yeah. So the power to take action and have it be effective. So when you
With
say,
responsibility, isn't it, as well?
yeah, yeah. So when you say that in your work your voice is squashed or quashed, um, you're saying, they're not giving me any agency. I don't have any agency in my workplace. There's no way for me to make it better.
Mm.
If we can't make it better, then it really often and also the other place that helplessness really piles up and leads to burnout is when our caseload is too great. So if you have way too many patients to take care of the way that you want to take care of them, then that leads to burnout.
That's certainly for sure. I
Yeah.
used to work in A&E,
Uh-huh.
and 20 years ago, you hardly had any patients come to A&E at night.
Uh-huh.
Now the corridors are full
Oh
with
yeah.
people waiting on trolleys to be seen. So
Yeah.
I feel for my colleagues that work in A&E and in acute care because the trauma and the stress that they're under is just so much.
Yeah, and I think this, really speaks to the decline in empathy, is that as the world's resources become scarcer, which they do with climate crisis, then people become more frightened. And when we're frightened, we're not very good at being empathetic.
No, no, and I recognise that in my own work
Yeah.
when I'm with patients and when I have consultations, and I'm kind of learning to be more empathic with myself,
Mm,
which I'm quite enjoying, to give myself permission that it's actually okay to be a
oh,
little bit stressed. It's okay to sometimes be a little bit judgmental and unhappy.
of course you're stressed. Of course
Yeah.
you're judgmental and unhappy. Because your
But
brain makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, those are the things that you kind of weren't allowed to
Right.
say if you were
Right.
professional. You
Mm-hmm.
had to hide behind this facade, which
Right.
again that causes its own trauma, I think.
It does. Yeah, it impacts people's health not to be able to tell the truth.
Mm. Their truth.
Yes, yes, yeah, their truth. Yeah.
Okay. And when I was sent you my email, I've got to correct something because I talked to you about Kurt Lewin and change theory, and I said that you were obviously an innovator, and it actually comes from somebody called Everett Rogers.
Oh.
So so I got that mixed up. I kind of married the two together, and the
Ah.
name didn't fit the model. So
Oh.
that was his. It was called his diffusion of innovation theory. And I think I'd like to say thank you to you for being so innovative in putting this stuff together that
Ah.
really makes a lot of sense to me. And I hope it's going to make a lot of sense to other people. Um, Now, I'm just going to look at my notes again because
Of course.
I'm conscious that I kind of get stage fright and I go into that slight paralysis that you
Yeah.
do when you're trying to perform. Yeah, I think it feels to me that I'm doing a lot of work, to paraphrase what you said earlier about making the brain a kinder and more peaceful place to live.
Yeah.
And that's something that I want to share with somebody. And
Mm.
one of the things that I kind of want to admit to experiencing when I heard the phrase Marshall Rosenberg saying, making the world a more wonderful place, I thought, oh God, how prissy is that?
Mm.
You know? And
Mm.
I don't know where that came from, but it was real. And it's taken me a little while to unpackage that actually that gentleness, that love, and that kindness, and that empathy, and that tolerance, and that openness. Um, it's actually okay to have that. And it's not prissy, it's quite beautiful.
Well, it's true. We may need acknowledgement that we've worked pretty hard to develop a kind of a shell of cynicism that saves us from heartbreak as
Mm.
adults. So we're being asked to give up a protective shell that
Yeah.
where we say, "Oh, the world is messed up and nothing goes right, and I can't expect anything good." And what is this BS about wonderfulness? Yeah, yeah. So,
But it is actually beautiful, isn't it? You know, what is more nice than to try and make the world a more beautiful place, especially
right,
in today?
right, no kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, we talked earlier a little bit about the health service and burnout. Um, you've also talked about the work of, is it Jaak Panksepp?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah,
I love you.
and his circuits.
Yes, yes.
How does the circuits relate to burnout? Because I'm interested for several reasons. Because I want to help people that have had burnout, because
Oh,
I've had it. I've had it before.
oh.
And what goes on in the burnout?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say that when you share that you've had burnout, I just feel so much kind of tenderness, and there's like this funny diffused pain that gives me tears and comes across the top of my cheekbones. So just a lot of tenderness for burnout here.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And so
That
ask me.
makes my hair go on all tingly when you get that. It's when you get that kind of understanding and acceptance and verification that what you've gone through is difficult. It's a really it touches.
Yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
I guess not many people get that.
No, it's true. What was your question though about burnout?
So the question was about, where does burnout sit with
Oh, oh,
the circuitry that Panksepp has talked
yeah.
about?
So, Jaak Panksepp, he would use the word systems, and I use the word circuits. So I'll use the word circuits because that's what I say all the time. There are 7 circuits that Jaak Panksepp delineated that are separate, like the London Underground. There's a train that goes through Piccadilly. There are different trains that go through Piccadilly that go different places. There are these routes in the London Underground, and in our brains there are these routes that energy and information travel on, just like train lines. And each different train line is run with a different neurotransmitter. So we have different areas of the brain that light up, different routes, different circuits in the brain that light up in response to different emotions. So Jaak Panksepp said seeking was the primary foundational working circuit of the human brain. And it's the left hemisphere, and it's the get her done circuit. And then we have the care circuit, and we have the panic grief circuit, which is the circuit of abandonment and alarmed aloneness. And then we have the fear circuit and the rage circuit. We have the play circuit and the sexuality circuit. And then I added disgust. He refused before he died to add disgust. But I think that so much research has been accumulating. So disgust is its own thing. So I've added disgust. So 8 different ways like 8 different train lines in the human brain. Yeah. And for seeking, for burnout, what happens is that we get stalled out in our seeking circuit. We're being asked to do more than we can do. We see problems that aren't being addressed. We have the other place that burnout happens is in the care circuit, because we care about the people. The most common place for burnout to happen is in social services, in health and social services. And because we love the patients, we love our clients. And when we can't help them, or when it seems like the system that we're working in is sort of deliberately making decisions that prevent
Yeah.
us from helping the people that we care about, or making it illegal to help the people that we care about, even sometimes, um, then then that is prime territory for burnout, because what the circuit wants to do, it can't do. What the seeking circuit wants to do, it doesn't get to do. What the care circuit wants to do, it doesn't get to do. So those are the 2 big ones that are involved in burnout.
So that's the trauma of not being able to do what you want to do.
Yeah, yeah. What you want to do, what you're born to do, what your love is telling you is necessary. And does that match your experience?
Sorry?
Does that match your burnout experience?
Yeah, I think my burnout experience was not being able to do what I wanted to do to the level that I wanted to do it, and being pushed by people from above, to, and working in an environment that didn't match,
Yeah,
everything was driven by time waiting in A&E.
yeah,
So people had to be moved, otherwise the government targets weren't met.
right.
And then the managers got punished because they
Oh,
didn't meet the targets. And the whole humanism and the care just goes out of the window.
no kidding.
And I wonder what, the fracture and the disgust rate is within those people that work in that environment that leads to burnout and them not going to work, to taking sick time, to changing jobs, to retiring early, and
Yeah.
what actual cost that is to society. Because
Oh,
when you think about so many experienced people leaving a profession, then that for me speaks volumes.
no kidding.
Um, so I think we're probably coming to the end of the time that you got available, and I'm once again really grateful for you taking the time. It shows what a great heart, big heart you've got. So thank you for that. And I looked at your website and I was I was kind of blown away because when you hear about somebody and you don't know the backstory, but your organisation is like on an industrial, huge scale. It's a really big organisation that you're behind now, isn't it?
Well, there are 10 wonderful contractors who work together to let the work website be as responsive and caring as possible, because the help desk, for example, is manned by actual people who actually answer questions.
Yeah.
there's no decision tree
No.
like choose this and then that and then that and then that so that we can help you. No, you just get to write in and have
Yeah.
people there, because I have like this mission, for this
Beautiful. Yeah.
beautiful information to reach the world.
Yeah, I
And
love that
one
word, the mission. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
yeah, one way to reach people now is with a website and with classes that are online, so that anybody anywhere in the world can take classes and learn this stuff and start to make their own brain a more beautiful place to live, a more cozy, warm, welcoming
Yeah.
place to come home to.
And what's really great about that is the accessibility that the internet gives us now.
Yes.
And like places like your website and your webinars that I've seen, you'll come up with a name and
Yeah.
then you can I follow the name.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the underground, and I reckon that all of the different um, modalities and flavors of people that are in the psychology that is like the London Underground.
Yeah.
I've not touched over half of the lines,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I've only probably gone to three or four of the stations.
Yeah.
At the moment, my learning is at a beginner level, I guess. But there's a massive opportunity for people to pick up really useful stuff by following the links that people feed into the system. And
Yeah.
I've enjoyed looking at your website. So,
Oh, I'm so glad.
and I just wondered, do you know how many books you sold of your first book?
Somewhere around 13,000 or 14,000 at this point, I think. It's,
Yeah. And I
yeah.
wonder how many people are going to be impacted from the book and then impact on other people.
I know
It's like a mushroom, isn't it?
wonderful. Yeah. 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 It's quite wonderful.
So, have you got any plans for the future? What's Sarah doing in the next 5 years?
Um, I hope to continue to make the website reach people, and to continue to be able to do the summit. You know, I'm I'm 62 and I'd like to keep working for another 15 years. I'd like to be able to continue to. I love old brains. You know, brains are like wine, and
Mm.
and as we get older and older, our brains become more and more delicious, and more and more um, expansive and connecting. So we're simultaneously losing material in our temporal lobes from memory, but we're always complexifying the right hemisphere's prefrontal cortex to amygdala network, sort of a permaculture garden of neurons that just becomes more and more complex as we age. So I kind of love the way that I love getting to experience the ripening of the material. What's so interesting about brains is that so often we see folks who are neuroscientists. I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm a neuroeducator, but we often see people in the world of neuroscience really hitting their stride when they're in their 50s and 60s, because it's such a complex system and it takes ripe, mature brains to be able to really kind of capture the complexity and work with it. So I'm looking forward to exploration and delight and laughter. Yeah.
And I understand that you do about 120 days teaching around the world?
Oh, I did before the pandemic. I was teaching teaching and traveling 200 days a year before the pandemic. Now I'm teaching probably 300 days a year online.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Sarah, Peyton, thank you so much for sharing some of your wisdom, sharing your humanity and your warmth. And I'm really grateful to have had this chat with you.
Well,
And maybe our paths will cross another day.
I hope so, and I'm delighted and excited to have another person who's so interested in this convergence of interesting material.
Yeah, I think I wrote to you and I said I've got this idea about person-centeredness model with polyvagal theory and polyvagal theory and neuro, nonviolent communication, and I thought I'd invented it.
Oh, yes. Well, you have.
But it was with you. But I guess that's what people do, isn't it? You know,
Yeah.
they think they've created something unique, and actually other people have got that kind of flavour going on as well.
Yeah, yeah. But your flavor will be absolutely delicious.
Oh, God bless you. Thank you very much. Have a great day, because I know
Okay.
this has been a morning for you, and I hope your
Yes.
day goes well and your world is beautiful.
Oh, thank you, Andy.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
Okay.
Bye
Bye
bye.
for now.